What is this? I don't even know what it is. Thanks for joining me, Mac Engel, Fort Worth Star Telegram, Engel Podcast, here with a great guest for this episode. Great guest because if you like tennis, you like sports, or if you ever aspire to fall into a career, this woman is your inspiration. My guest played college tennis at Rice University, and how she wound up at Rice is absolutely crazy. And then how she wound up in her career that has taken her almost all over the world as the voice of tennis is almost even crazier. This includes being the female voice of God at the US Open last fall in New York. This interview is a little older. I did this a while back, but it's still great. Please welcome my friend, my guest, Miss Blair Henley. People, when you are at these tennis events, are people coming up to you like, I know you. Well, why do I know you? Or because they're tennis fans, do they have a good idea of who you are already?
A little bit of both, I would say. But I do think this year, having done some of the Voice of God work on Arthur Ashe Stadium, that's obviously going out all over the world. I think that maybe people will become more familiar with my voice because of that sort of exposure, because for a lot of the time what I do, sort of that in-stadium emceeing, that's just going out to the house. It's not necessarily going to the broadcast. So if you're a hardcore tennis fan and you come to a lot of tennis events, then yes, my voice is probably familiar. But again, with that US Open job that I had this year, which is different from anything I've done in the past, my voice was also the introducing of the players was going out to the world feed. So it was going out to countries all over the world. So who knows? I don't know. Maybe I'll get more of that now.
How did you get that? Like, how did you get the Voice of God job? Because I would imagine that'd be kind of coveted. How did that happen?
Yeah. So this year was the 50th anniversary of equal prize money at the US Open, which I don't think most people understand how big of a deal that was in 1973, because the Australian Open didn't have equal prize money until, I believe, 2000, and then Roland Garros and Wimbledon not until 2007. So the US Open was so far ahead of its time on that, and they had this really neat ceremony presentation plan for opening night at the US Open, which if you've never experienced opening night at the US Open every year, it's really incredible. And I have worked on that entertainment team now under Michael Fuhr and Fuhr Productions at the USTA since 2015. And I felt very thankful that this year when they said, hey, we've had a male voice, Andy Taylor, he's sort of a legend at the US Open, been doing it since the beginning of Arthur Ashe Stadium, and he is unbelievable full-time voice actor, so good at what he does. And then this year when they said, okay, we'd like to introduce a female voice, I feel very, very thankful that they said, okay, we have somebody on staff who we feel like can handle this role. Because again, yes, is it reading something into a microphone? In itself, that's not hard. But it is an actual profession that many people do just that. And so I definitely wanted to make sure I didn't fumble this role that I had been given. So by all accounts, I think it went okay this year, but it's definitely a whole other skill set doing that versus live hosting on the court.
Okay, before I'm going to ask you anything about your career, you mentioned it, and I didn't, when I sent you the list of questions, I forgot about the one that I want an answer to. And
okay,
this is a tough one. So anybody who's familiar with major tennis knows that men's tennis is best of 5, women's is best of 3. Why is it still only best of 3?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will tell you, the women are happy to play best of 5. Ask any female tennis player, and they're like, sure, if they asked us to, sure, we would do it. The scheduling would be almost impossible at a slam. And
everything would just go crazy long and never get, okay.
Yeah, it would be, the scheduling is already difficult at a slam. I think it would be almost impossible to add that wrench into things as well. I would also say there are a lot of people who argue for men to play best of 3 at slams, or at least up until maybe the semifinals. There are a lot of people who say that tennis, to be more appealing to a wider sports audience, needs to be shorter. And if you've seen, I mean, for instance, the final in Cincinnati this year between Djokovic and Alcaraz was over 4 hours. Over 4 hours, yes. It was one of the best matches many people had ever seen. People are calling it the match of the year for sure. And it was 2 out of 3 sets. You could have a really exciting match that is 2 out of 3 sets. And so I would say, why can't the men play 2 out of 3? It would solve many issues in tennis. And and there you can find people on both sides of the fence there. But I would say the women are fine playing best of 5.
That is a question I have wanted to ask. No one,
Yeah.
I've thrown that on Twitter a million times. I've asked tennis people this question. I never get an answer on it. And I had to assume it makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. It does. It makes perfect sense. And in light of what you just said, I hadn't even thought about that. To try to reach, everybody's trying to go shorter now, right? Major League Baseball, college football, everybody's trying to go shorter. Do you think that's going to happen in the next 5, 8, 10 years, that they will compress it to reduce it from 5 to 3 for the men in the majors or the slams?
I personally, and this is a very controversial topic in the tennis world because people have very strong opinions saying there is nothing like best of 5 tennis. And yes, that is true for a percentage of best of 5 matches. But there is another percentage, I would say probably the majority of best of 5 matches, where you already know what the outcome is going to be going in, and it's just a matter of how quickly can they win the 3 straight sets. So I don't know. I wouldn't mind seeing it shortened, to be honest. I think, again, the fact that if you are a football fan or an F1 fan or whatever it is, whatever day of the week, Sunday night, whatever, when you can get everyone together, make some nachos, sit down on the couch and watch your event. In tennis, you have no idea when your favorite player is going to be playing. Not only do you not know what time, you don't even know what day. So people buying tickets at the US Open, hoping that they get to see, I don't know, Daniil Medvedev. You don't know what day he's going to play if you want to buy the tickets before the tournament. And then you have to hope that he's going to stay in the tournament up until this particular time. So there are so many issues in tennis currently as far as that's concerned. I don't know. I know you have one question coming up about if I were the czar of tennis. There are so many issues. I wish I had. I just don't know what the answer is, but the scheduling thing is a problem, and it makes it hard to follow tennis. And so I don't think it would be a terrible thing if we cut it down to best of 3.
I agree with you. All right. When I met you last year, you told me just a second about yourself that you grew up in Florida and you wound up playing college tennis at Rice. Now, I don't know if Rice University's reputation obviously speaks for itself. Was that a good college tennis program, or was it one of those things where, like, you really want me to come play tennis for you? Okay, bye, Mom. I love you guys. See you later. I'm going to Rice.
No, I actually remember the first call I had with the coach at the time, Roger White, and my first question was, "Is it warm there?" Which is laughable, of course, for anyone who's set foot in Houston. Because
that was your first question.
It's one of the first questions. Is it warm there? Because I was also, the other school that I seriously considered was Princeton, and again, there were many factors that went into choosing Rice, but I did love the fact that it wasn't in the North. But in college tennis, there's obviously the recruiting factor. And so when you play those national tournaments as a junior, the colleges come watch you play, they show their interest. If you're also interested in the school, then you get to go on your recruiting trip. So I only did 2. You're allowed 5. I only did 2 recruiting trips to Rice and Princeton, and Rice knocked it out of the park with my recruiting trip. They were interested in what I was interested in, and what do you see yourself doing, and let's show you a day that you might experience as a college student. The team was incredibly welcoming. Not at all, like, I was pretty sheltered growing up, and I went out to the courts for a practice, and they're all practicing in like spandex and sports bras, and I was like, okay, this is different. But they were incredibly welcoming. They're still some of my best friends to this day. We're actually planning a Rice tennis reunion in Indian Wells this year. They're going to come visit me while I'm working. So Yeah, it was the recruiting trip that really sealed the deal. The fact that it was a great academic school, and the fact that I could grow my tennis as well. It was big.
Did you get to play professionally at all, Blair?
I played low level ITF events, which is sort of just below you get to the WTA. I played those the summers of my college experience, and then a little bit afterward. So yeah, sort of those 10,000 tournaments. I think they're 15K now, but at the time they were 10,000, and so I got a little taste of what that world was like. And man, it's tough. it's tough.
Do you think tennis fans have any appreciation? Not just tennis, you can broaden it to sports in general. Just how hard it is and how much money you've got to spend on the low levels of professional tennis to try to advance out.
I think people are starting to understand more. The ATP has put together a program that guarantees income for different ranking brackets. The WTA is trying to get the same thing in motion, where if you are in a certain rankings range, you can guarantee a certain amount of income. So I think people are maybe starting to understand more because those players are finding more of a voice. You have Novak Djokovic, who has really been behind the PTPA organization, which, believe me, I think many people have questions about sort of their mission and where they're going to be going in the future. But the idea is they want to support the players. They want to make sure more people can make a living playing tennis. They want to make sure the schedule makes sense, that they're not playing with different balls every week, which has been a consistent issue on tour. So again, I think people are maybe understanding more, but it's a grind. If you don't have a benefactor who is supporting your career, or a sponsor, or wealthy parents, it's really, really hard to make it happen, because it might take a while. It might take time. And especially now, people are having breakthroughs at, you have a Chris Eubanks who's having his breakthrough at 27 years old.
Yeah.
If he wasn't able to hang on financially for those first several years out of college, we would never have seen the incredible story that he was in 2023.
I heard a story from a tennis coach. He's a former college tennis player, and I don't know if this was prominent on the women's side, but I know it was on the men's side, that to obviously move up, you have to have rankings and points and all this other stuff. And he said it's not uncommon that you'll find at the lower levels that Eastern European players, or players who don't have a lot of money, will essentially throw a match to be paid by the guy who wins in exchange, so that player can move up, because the disparity in income for these people, whether they're American or Western European, is so much that it's worth for the guy from the Eastern European countries, like, yeah, sure, I'll throw this match. You'll give me $1,000, $5,000, and that $5,000 is going to carry me so much further where I live compared to where you live that it's totally worth it. Is that an outlier, or is that fairly common?
Well, the Washington Post just maybe 6 weeks ago did a story on the largest match fixing ring, or it might have been in sports, but certainly was in tennis. There was a guy in Eastern Europe who had a network of over 100 players who are working for him. And tennis is the second or third most bet on sport in the world, and people don't know that because there's tennis going on every day, 365 days a year. And there are many things you can bet on within a tennis match. So I don't know about that specifically, but I know that those players at the low levels are absolutely susceptible to someone who would suggest such a thing, because they are struggling. Yeah. So the economics make sense that that's a thing that happens. They have the tennis integrity unit that is out there flagging matches that look suspicious. So there are people who get caught doing that for sure. I'm sure for everyone who gets caught, there are probably many more out there. So yeah, it's not unheard of.
So when you finished playing and you decided, okay, this isn't for me, and then you had to go, be an adult, how did you wind up in this job? Because I mean, I know everybody who winds up in media, whether it's me, my friends, anybody, Blair, there's always some weird path. It's not like, well, I worked as a teller and a banker, then I moved up, and then I was this, and I was a financial advisor. somebody knew somebody. It was, hey, you look good on camera. Well, I like your voice. Here's a microphone. Try it out. What was yours?
Yeah. Well, I guess I can thank the fact that my husband played minor league baseball, because after we got married, there was the realization that I had this realization beforehand. It was not a surprise to me, but it was very hard. We moved, I think, like 15 or 16 times in 3 years. It was really hard to have a normal job. So I was able to teach tennis in almost every city that we ended up in. So tennis proved to be sort of a common thread throughout my travels with him while he was playing. But I had always liked writing. Rice didn't really have many. Actually, I don't know. Have you ever run into Ronnie Crocker, reporter for Houston Chronicle?
Yeah.
A writer for Houston Chronicle for years and years.
Yeah.
Anyway, he taught a newspaper writing class, but that was all the official training that I had. That was it. But I had always enjoyed it. And so when my husband Tyler was playing and traveling, I wrote for a tennis website called worldtennismagazine.com. Randy Walker, a great guy, worked for the USTA for years and had this website. And I said, hey, can I do some reporting for you, some match coverage? And so that's how I started. That's how I started. So I started as a writer. And covered on site. I only covered one tournament while I was writing for worldtennismagazine.com. But when my husband Tyler was finished with baseball, he had to go back to finish school at Rice. So I'm thinking, okay, back in Houston, what am I doing? Are we, because I don't know if we're going to be there for a long time. He may get a job that's somewhere else. And I ended up getting a job with a Houston-based website called tennisnow.com. And to their credit, they did not take no for an answer. I was not positive that was the direction that I wanted to go. I think they asked 3 times. So just didn't, and this was somebody I knew from the tennis community. And so in hindsight, really glad that they didn't just say, okay, fine, she's not interested. They kept knocking on the door. And it was through being in media rooms, it's like you get to know those people real quickly. And in tennis, because tennis is so much smaller than a sport like, baseball or football, as soon as somebody sees someone who knows tennis, who's a hard worker, who hopefully does a pretty good job, I think word travels relatively quickly. And so I was sort of became a known entity as a writer, not well known, but known enough. Right. And then I guess my big break, so to speak, came in 2015 when I had done some on-camera stuff for that website. They had a pretty impressive YouTube following. So I did like a bi-weekly tennis news update. So that's where I got my feet wet on camera. And then in 2015, they needed someone for Court 17 at the US Open, which if you've ever been, Court 17 is like a 3,000 seat stadium. It sounds like it's out in the boondocks, but it's one of the coolest courts in tennis still to this day. I actually have it right there behind me on top. Okay. But yeah, so it's kind of where it all started for me. This cute little stadium out in the corner at the US Open. I had no training whatsoever because live hosting, I mean, it's a different animal than reading off a teleprompter in a studio. I was also playing the music. I was the DJ for Court 17. Didn't even it's so funny.
Did you have any clue what you were doing?
Totally flying by the seat of my pants. I had basic instructions, but even, for instance, where I'm like, oh, well, now I know this. But at the time, it's not something I thought about. You always have to wait until the chair umpire calls the score before you start playing the music. And Fergus Murphy, who I know so well now, he's a very well-known tennis chair umpire. I apparently was jumping the gun on the music because some umpires take a long time to get the score out at the end of the game. And he turned around at me because I was sitting like courtside, like in a little corner with a little boom box. And he turns around from the back of his chair and he's like, wait till I call the score. So anyway, little things like that I learned as I went. You're also every court there is televised. So the walkouts on a bigger court, you have a stage manager who's making sure the players don't blow by you and walk onto the court before it's time because you have to wait for the count from the cameraman. So again, all of these things that I was managing and it was, I'm 5'4", I'm literally literally standing at the doorway, making sure like, no, we got to wait. We have whatever it is, 90 seconds till we walk, putting them in the right order. So I couldn't have thought of, looking back now, it was the absolute best training I ever could have asked for, because I had to sort of figure out my own routine, my own shtick. There was sort of a routine that I developed, and there was no one really supervising me. I appreciate that they trusted me to that extent. Maybe I was trustworthy. I don't know. But they said, well, she'll figure it out. And I did. And it was the best training I ever could have asked for.
Did you ever have anything? I think I know I have. Did you have anything where you experienced something that was humiliating to you and you're like, what am I doing? Like, I suck at this. I need to drive a cab, teach school. I shouldn't be doing this. This is a joke. Or did you avoid that mistake?
Oh gosh, I feel like I have those all the time. Where I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I will say, in the one thing that I don't think people maybe think about or realize, in that live hosting job where, say, you have 5 matches on your court in a day, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. There are, from walkout timings to anthem singers to coin tossers to music malfunctions to a gaffe in a post-match interview, or from you're trying to promote the next match and you forget who's playing the next match. There are just a lot of things that happen in a day that can go wrong. And so, yes, I've had most of those things happen to me, but I think the one that comes to mind talking about court 17 is when I think it was, so 2015 I started. So maybe it was 2016 the next year. So I was still, relatively speaking, a baby MC. And I was doing champions matches. They used to have a small champions tournament at the US Open in the second week once the matches got more thin on the outside court. So you had, the McEnroe brothers, the Jensen brothers. I think, there were women as well, Lindsay Davenport, Arantxa Sanchez Vicario, a lot of the legends. So I had the McEnroe brothers on my court a few times between 2015 and 2016. And it was sort of I think it was a round robin format. They had yet to win a match. So I hadn't gotten to actually speak to them in the post-match interview. And then I have them on my court in whatever it was, 2016, 2017. And they absolutely demolished the Jensens. It was like 0-1. And the post-match interviews ESPN still streams the post-match interviews. And so, and I have no stage manager. And when you have the champions, it is herding cats. They generally just do what they want to do. If a fan over in the back left corner wants an autograph and they want to sign it, they're going to go sign it. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting there and I'm like, we've got an interview to do. So it's much more complicated. And then you add doubles in. There were many things that I was probably not fit to handle all by myself out there. I do an interview, and I was told that day, interview both teams. I interview the losers, the Jensens, both of whom are fantastic. Love them both to this day. And then I go over to Patrick and John, who, by the way, I also love, just worked with them both at Labor Cup. But it's funny that this was sort of the beginning of my interactions with them. Was I distracted? Did I have probably too much on my plate? Yes. Did I majorly overestimate how much I could joke with John McEnroe? Also, yes. Because I made a comment saying, I said, well, finally I get to talk to you guys after a win. Like, what was the preparation like going into, again, it's an exhibition. This is just to frame it. It's an exhibition. But I phrased it poorly. I get to talk to you guys after what training went into, because it was a beat down. It was an absolute, they demolished the Jensens. So again, I thought it was sort of open forum, and John did not like that. And he goes to the crowd. It does one of these. The crowd goes wild, and he packed up his stuff and walked off the court. And Patrick, sweet Patrick, who's great, he looked at me and he sort of had to go with the team on that one. And so he too left the court. And I, at the time, there was my boss, who was my boss for a while at Indian Wells, had come to the court to watch me. I was not yet hired at Indian Wells. I'd come to the court to watch, saw this whole thing go down. My heart is, in my intestines. I'm thinking it's over for me. This is it. It's been a good 2-year run, but I'll never work in tennis again.
Were you mad at all?
What was that?
Were you mad at John at all? Because that's kind of embarrassing. He didn't need to do that. I have very strident opinions about this kind of stuff now. When I see guys like that, he was trying to embarrass you. And there's no reason. I've seen how Greg Popovich, and I know Greg Popovich is a really intense guy, and he hates those in-game sideline interviews, and I get it. But there's sometimes I'm like, just be a pro. Come on. Because I'm very sympathetic now to any sideline reporter. They're no good. What are you going to ask? Some of these questions, like, what are you supposed to ask? It's much harder than people think. And to me,
true.
It is like, what are you supposed to ask?
Yeah.
Because the question that you really want to ask, you can't.
Yeah.
You're getting killed out there. Yeah. Why do you suck? So like in that moment, you're embarrassed, but were you mad at him all? Like, what are you doing?
I don't think I ever got to that point. I think I blamed myself. But again, I get they had just won. They had just played a great match, won easily. And so I was thinking it was looser than it was. And it was a good lesson for me to learn. But no, I don't think I was mad. I will say I appreciate to this day my boss, I had to go in and say, hey, before you hear this from someone else, this is a thing that just happened on court 17. And he had my back. He said, I totally get it. And from then on, we just interviewed the winners, just to take one extra, factor out of the equation. So there's one less thing to think about. But I had the chance to interview John the next day. Mm-hmm. They won again. And my first question was, John, you are arguably the best doubles player of all time. And then went on, and then I just listed resume points. It was the most, I couldn't have buttered him up more in that initial question off the bat. We finished the interview. He gave me a high five, which I felt was our okay, we're good. We can move on. And I've since, interviewed and interacted with John and Patrick, by the way, who I love, who's now the CEO of the International Tennis Hall of Fame, or the president at the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Am I getting those? Regardless, I work with him often, and they're both great. So, and John is a rock star. Do you not know what you're going to get with John on a given day? No, you have no idea.
Blair, wait a minute. Hang on.
Okay.
I get irritated with that. I'm like, he's in the media. He's in front of the camera. He knows. And if anybody in tennis should be able to take that totally throwaway, benign question that you asked him, it should be John McEnroe, because he will throw his opinions out like, Rush Limbaugh used to do it. And that's just my own thing. I'm very sympathetic for professionals in that situation. I'm like, come on, just be nice. And so when I hear him, especially John, and the fact that you had to sit there and, kiss his butt the next day, but you have a good sense of humor about it. One thing that you do really well, because you've been around the game now forever, I can't imagine you remember any part of your life without tennis, is that now you've been behind it. You see how the sausage is made. You see it's the circus element to it, the entertainment element of it. And one thing you do project sincerely is a genuine passion and love for tennis. And that's not always easy when you're working in it. Has that been tested or challenged at all since this has become your job?
Yes. The answer is yes. I shouldn't say my love for the actual game of tennis. No, my love for the show and sort of the machine of tennis. Yes. Just because there are so many things behind the scenes that are challenges. And for me, I'm a freelancer. And so every job sort of presents a new set of challenges, and some are wonderful and amazing. And I have met some of the coolest people through working in tennis. But yes, there are things that you're thinking, gosh, if we can't change this, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but if we can't make an adjustment on this, what hope do we have? It just is really hard. There are just so many entities in tennis. you have this organization, organization, the slams, the people in charge at the various, USTA, Tennis Australia. It's just really hard to get anything done because there's so many cooks in the kitchen. And that, as somebody who wants tennis to succeed, that can be frustrating.
Okay, so we've only got like 5 or 6 minutes left here, but so somebody decides, you know what, Blair's got her stuff together. She's amazing. And we're going to make her czar of tennis. Which probably you don't even have that power in your house with 2 young kids.
Oh, heck no.
Right. So now they're going to give you, all ruling power of tennis for like 24 hours. What do you change?
So I can think of what I would want to change. The problem is, in my position, sort of outside looking in, I don't exactly know the best way to change them. And one I mentioned already, the balls are the tennis ball issue, the fact that players are using different balls from week to week. This year, the women switched from Wilson regular duty to Wilson extra duty during the hard court swing. Many players have said it's caused injuries. During COVID, things changed with the way that balls were manufactured, that manufacturing process. There have, according to many people, been changes sort of since then in the quality of the balls. It's a real issue.
It's a money thing, isn't it? Because I've seen it on the youth level with my daughter. Isn't it a money thing?
In terms of which tournaments have which deals with which manufacturers?
No, just in terms of like, I remember it was ridiculous, Blair. It was like something, she was playing with one set of balls and they were less expensive because it was something about how much they would last, because a tennis ball has only so many strikes in it before it basically goes flat. But it essentially came down to, I remember an instructor telling me, it basically came down to, we're playing with these balls because the USTA wants these. And it basically came down to a financial decision, which, it doesn't really surprise you as an adult, but as a player, like, are you kidding me?
That's part of it, but a lot of these tournaments have actual deals with the manufacturer. So yes, is money a piece of that puzzle? Which one makes more sense for them? Yes, absolutely. I think that's part of it. But it's because each tournament is functioning in its own little ecosystem, and that therein sort of lies one of the issues in tennis. So you have the ball issue. The scheduling issue is a massive one. Dasha Kazakina, who's one of my favorites on the women's side, she was here in Fort Worth last year playing at the WTA finals. She was just quoted saying that she just doesn't have she's out of bandwidth to pack, to think of travel logistics, to try to figure out when she needs to land to get transportation from the tournament. And the fact that these players are doing this weekly, it's by the end of the year is so incredibly exhausting. The season is probably too long. But again, you want these people to earn money. So if there are more chances to earn money in the fall, then you want those tournaments. It's right. So but therein sort of lies one of the questions. And that's sort of my third prong. So you have the balls, the schedule, and the money. Where is that going to come from moving forward? Steve Simon has said in the past, it's like, listen, people say the right things when it comes to women's sports. And there are organizations and companies that have put their money where their mouths are in terms of support and sponsorship, but there are many who don't. And so you see this sort of groundswell of support for women's sports, but when it comes down to it, are people actually shelling out the dollars? And that, I think, is still a big question mark.
Oh my God, you went down a rabbit hole. I could talk to you for a month about this. I have really strident thoughts about it. In fact, you're the first one I've heard who said, like, hey, we're talking about it, but where's the money? I watch, I've been around women's basketball for a long time, and the quality of play is so much better today than it was in 1996, 98. And there were great players there, but it doesn't even compare. It doesn't even compare. And I'm sure women's tennis is the same way. But when I look up into the stands and I see these strong, well-meaning advocates for women's sports say, if you build it, they'll come. If you build it, they'll come. And they're right. And you see these events for Iowa women's basketball. They had like 56,000 for a scrimmage at Hawkeye Stadium. The women's volleyball team at Nebraska sold out like 98,000 seats for a game at the football stadium. These are one-off events, and that's great. But I'm talking about the regular season game. And when I look up, and there's still more, there's more today than there was in 98. And I firmly believe that where women didn't get really started in sports until about 1990. So this is still really all in its infancy, but I'm right there with you, Blair, in terms of, okay, you're saying you're going to do it. But when I look up in the stands, with the exception of maybe women's tennis, it doesn't compare yet. It's still way behind. Okay, last question I'm going to ask you, then I'll let you go.
Yeah.
Dated which one? Because I got like 1,000 questions out of that.
I know. Well, yeah. I mean, listen, that last topic I could have, but just a quick note. Okay. I was at the US Open and I was in Arthur Ashe Stadium for the women's final and the men's final. Women's final, nothing. It was one of the coolest atmospheres I've ever seen.
Watching Coco win.
Unbelievable. And the men's atmosphere was flat. It just, there are absolutely.
Was it really? The men's atmosphere was a dud?
Yes. It was like people just were waiting for the inevitable, which was Djokovic winning.
Yeah, is that boring now?
I mean, I don't think it's boring. I think we can appreciate. I think we can appreciate his excellence, absolutely. And some of those matches along the way, like Carlos Djokovic, a couple of times this year at Wimbledon, and then in Cincinnati. I mean, those were some of the coolest matches that people have ever seen. But there are duds in men's sports too. It just
all the time
are not as quick to point those out.
No, you're right. All right, we're out of time. Okay. Blair, I'll do this again. You're great. Thank you very much. Best to you and your family. I appreciate it, Blair.
Thanks, Mac.
Okay, see you later.